In the week since the election in the U.S., the already rampant abuse on Twitter has just gotten worse. Joining us to talk about some of the new anti-harassment features that the social network is implementing is Katie Benner from the New York Times. Welcome back, Katie.
Hey, it's great to be here and great to see you.
So what are some of the new tools that Twitter announced today?
I think a couple of the big ones, they've made it easier, the process easier to report abuse, and they've streamlined that process. But more importantly, they've allowed people to report abuse even if it is not happening to them. The reason why this is important is because a lot of people mute accounts that are saying mean things to them on Twitter. So if somebody's saying something horrible to you, oftentimes your inclination is to mute it so you don't have to see it, but you really don't know what's going on in the background. Those people probably still have accounts and they may still be talking about you. They may be even doing things like doxing you, aka putting your personal information on the internet. So if you're a bystander and you see this behavior happening, you can report that behavior. I think that's really important. Also, I just mentioned muting accounts. Before you had to mute the user. Now you can mute key phrases and topics of conversation that you don't want to be a part of. So, for example, I'm sure that we all remember during the election season, there were certain memes that existed on Twitter around, frogs, for example. I won't be more descriptive than that because it's too depressing. And that was, that handle or mention of Pepe the Frog is something that you could have muted then as well if you didn't want to see certain white supremacist memes going around on Twitter in the run-up to the election. So that is also an improvement. And then finally, internally, the company has done more to train its own employees around spotting abuse. So there was a time when people would report something as abusive, but culturally, a picture of a frog on Twitter might not ring as abusive to somebody who's working for Twitter but not located in the US. So they've done more to sort of educate people within Twitter about common memes that are considered either hateful or abusive.
So there's some of the things that, whenever they come up with something new, I'm like a broken record. Like, why did they take them so long? Like, for example, like the difference between muting and reporting. Like the reason why people mute instead of report or block, but the difference between blocking and muting. Unless you've been harassed on Twitter, you might not understand that when you block someone, people get really mad. So a lot of times it's easier just to mute them. Then you don't know. It's like, like you said, like they're just shouting into the void. You don't have to see it, but then, like you said, you could be doxxed. You could be, your reputation could, while you're quietly, I can't hear you, your reputation could be ruined. So do you have any idea why it took them so long to implement features like what you're talking about? Or like, for example, being able to be a bystander reporting abuse? Like that seems like a basic thing that we teach children in elementary school, like stand up when you see someone being bullied. Why did it take them so long to implement the ability to report abuse when it wasn't you being abused?
Well, two things. I'll start by giving you Twitter's current thinking in defense, which is that they do understand this is a problem. And so they said that we should expect to see more products roll out. We should see the cadence of product rollout really increase around anti-abuse tools. So they are taking this seriously, and we should hopefully see that in what happens with the product. Having spoken with former employees, it's clear that Twitter just didn't take it seriously for a while, which is why it took so long to make some of these basic changes. I wouldn't go so far as to say they didn't care about people having a horrible experience on the site, because obviously they want people to have a good experience, or they're not going to sign up and they're not going to come, which we've seen to be a problem for Twitter. But they honestly didn't understand how corrosive the experience could be for people on Twitter. And part of that was because I think, this is not the most diverse executive team, and it wasn't the most diverse company, and that their own lived experiences, they had no firsthand experience with how hard it can be to be on a public platform like Twitter and incur that kind of really horribly violent language. Like they just didn't really have a concept of it. It's not an excuse, but I do think that's one of the reasons it took a long time.
And I mean, also they will also say that they want to protect free speech. Like each time you take away some of what Twitter once was. A lot of people say, look, that's my free speech. But when you talk about muting, like on my end, then that's how, I mean, if I want to mute, if I want to stop hearing what you're saying, I can do that, and I'm not inflicting your free speech if you get to continue saying whatever you're saying.
Of course, and Twitter started very innocently in a lot of ways. It was a communications platform amongst friends or people who had topical interests who wanted to meet other people. It's sort of like, if you think about the early days of the internet, the idea was that the information was always coming from a trusted network, right? It was always coming from a trusted sender. So it was either a university or a government. So the internet was not built to have all these protocols that we're trying to put into it today around safety and, around trust, because it was begun in a very different way. I think Twitter similarly, I wouldn't say that Twitter is as important as all of the internet, but that Twitter similarly, when it was created, nobody anticipated that this was going to become a tool for hate speech, that this was going to become a tool to abuse people with whom you don't agree. That was just not really something that people thought of as a possibility when they launched Twitter.
It was really a tool to share what you were eating for lunch.
Exactly.
And look where we've come to now. Is there any chance that that these changes were kind of furthered or kind of pushed through a little bit quicker? I know obviously Twitter has had plans, has had designs to roll out these changes in a wider sort of way. But, a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks. Is there any indication that any of the most current events are kind of influencing their timetable on really just kind of speeding things up a little bit and getting it out there so people can use them?
I think for the updates that were announced today, no. I mean, a lot of them are extensions of things that were announced last year or at the beginning of the year, and I do think that they've been in the works. But I cannot imagine that the events of the last month haven't encouraged a lot of social media companies, not just Twitter, but Facebook, to take a really hard look at the sort of influence they have and whether or not there are responsibilities that come with that influence and power that haven't been fully accounted for.
Sure.
So in your piece in the Times, you talk about the interview with Donald Trump on 60 Minutes, where when asked about harassment, he said, "Stop it." To the people, he said, "Just really stop it." Do you think that that's going to stop it?
We're gonna see. This is gonna be a pretty wild next few months and year. I think that his cabinet picks go a long way toward, they say a lot as well in terms of how he feels about different people in the country and who is important and who is not. So that will be something to look to really closely, whether or not he tones down the rhetoric on Twitter. It is good. I think that it's good that he has told people who are ostensibly his supporters that they really need to stop being abusive. I mean, that is what we would expect from our leaders and role models. Mm-hmm. And let's hope that he continues to do so without needing a lot of prompting from others.
Well, I mean, when you read about the social history of mobs, which I think that's what is happening in a lot of areas of Twitter. There are mobs, and there's with a mob, there's the first person throws the rock, and then everyone else gangs up and doesn't even know why they're throwing the rocks often. And I feel like that is what's going on.
That has been Twitter for a long time too. So
yeah, really.
I think that it's interesting to see a lot of, like I said, a lot of soul searching, a lot of consciousness within the companies now, especially that they see that, they might want to say that they were not a big part of the election results. But certainly they were, social media companies and their distribution of news and opinion and thought and conversation, have replaced to some extent the physical town squares that we all once had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, the other feature that I think has a little bit to do with anti-harassment, but just for if you've ever been CC'd or added on a tweet that lasts forever and everyone's continuing, you can now thankfully remove yourself from those. So whether it was harassment or just some discussion of the latest, iPhone 7 battery.
The latest episode of Westworld.
Yes. Exactly. Right. Yeah, that's
you
the
can
thing.
now excuse yourself from those.
Yes, exactly. Which that I think we'll all be thankful for that. So they're rolling out slowly. They're not out yet, right?
Right.